The marble steps leading up to the mansion gleamed under the glow of golden chandeliers that spilled light through the towering glass windows. Black limousines lined the drive, their polished doors swinging open as men in tuxedos and women in jeweled gowns stepped out with laughter that rang through the cool Manhattan night. It was the kind of scene you only saw in magazines. The city's elite gathered for one of the most exclusive charity galas of the year. Camila Williams paused at the edge of the carpeted entrance, smoothing the folds of her navy blue evening dress. It hugged her frame with understated elegance, not flashy, not loud, but the kind of beauty that whispered confidence rather than demanded attention. She held a small clutch close to her side, her thumb brushing lightly against the cool metal clasp. Beneath it, hidden from view, her diamond wedding ring caught a faint spark of light. She took one steady breath and stepped forward. The security guard at the door barely gave her a moment's glance before his eyes narrowed. He scanned her from head to toe with a kind of practiced dismissal. "Service entrance is around the back," he said flatly, jerking his thumb toward a dark alley that curved behind the mansion. His voice wasn't cruel, not loud enough for others to hear, but it carried the sharp edge of assumption, the kind that cuts before you even realize you're bleeding. Camila stopped. For a heartbeat, the only sounds were the distant laughter from the hall and the clink of crystal glasses echoing from inside. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at him, calm, steady, unshaken. "I should be on the main list," she said softly, her voice composed, almost gentle, but there was something beneath it, a firmness that made the guard glance at her twice. He smirked, shaking his head as though she had told the funniest joke of the evening. "Yeah, sure, they all say that." His eyes slid past her, already moving on to the next couple stepping out of a limousine. Camila's heart beat slower, not faster. She had heard these words before, in stores, in meetings, even on sidewalks. The invisible walls that told her, in ways both small and large, that she did not belong. And yet, standing there in front of the grand double doors, she carried herself with the poise of someone who had learned long ago that belonging was not granted. It was owned. She gave a small nod, her lips curving into a faint smile that the guard didn't bother to read. Then, without protest, she turned and walked toward the side path, heels clicking against the stone with quiet authority. The cold breeze tugged at the hem of her gown, but her steps never faltered. If anyone had looked closer, they would have noticed the way her eyes studied everything. The security cameras tucked into corners, the faint cracks in the marble steps, the pattern of who was allowed to walk freely inside and who was redirected elsewhere. She absorbed it all, storing it in silence. From the kitchen entrance, steam drifted faintly into the night air, carrying the scent of garlic and roasted lamb. Workers in black uniforms hurried in and out, balancing trays, dodging the scolding shouts of event staff. The back of the mansion was a different world. No red carpet, no photographers, only exhaustion and quiet resignation. Camila pressed her clutch tighter against her side, the diamond ring inside catching against her skin. A secret spark of truth rested there, hidden just enough to stay invisible. She inhaled, steadying herself as if preparing for a performance only she knew was about to unfold. Because what the guard hadn't realized, what none of them would even think to imagine, was that the woman they had just sent to the shadows of the service entrance had more claim to the house than every glittering guest who walked through its gilded doors. And before the night was over, every single person inside would know it. The ballroom glittered like a palace carved from light. Crystal chandeliers spilled gold onto polished marble, and violins swelled in graceful waves above the chatter of Manhattan's finest. Waiters in pressed uniforms weaved between jeweled gowns and tailored suits, balancing champagne flutes that sparkled like liquid diamonds. Every corner of the room whispered wealth, power, exclusivity. Camila stepped across the threshold, her navy gown trailing softly against the marble, her eyes steady despite the sudden stillness that seemed to ripple through the crowd. Dozens of curious glances turned her way. Some lingered, some flickered away quickly, but all carried the same silent question. What is she doing here? Before she could take another step, a tall woman in a fitted silver dress cut across the floor like a blade. Victoria Hartwell, the event's organizer, had ruled New York's charity circuit for decades. Her smile was practiced, dazzling for donors, cutting for anyone beneath her standards. Tonight it was the latter. "You shouldn't even be here," Victoria hissed, her words soft enough not to disturb the music, but sharp enough to sting. Without waiting for a reply, she leaned closer, her hand grazing Camila's arm with false gentleness as she steered her away from the center of the room. "This is an exclusive gala. Someone like you can only serve at this kind of event, not attend it." A silence spread in her wake, as if the room itself held its breath. Guests lowered their eyes into their glasses, unwilling to intervene. A few whispered behind jeweled fingers, curiosity laced with unease. Camilla's grip on her clutch tightened. For a moment, she thought of the ring resting beneath it, a quiet symbol of her real place in this house. She could have spoken. She could have stopped the humiliation with a single sentence. But instead, she let her eyes linger on Victoria, a calm and unshaken, as though weighing the woman's soul in silence. "Sorry for the confusion," Camilla murmured finally, her tone carrying a composure that unsettled some of the guests nearby. She did not defend herself. She did not plead. Her calmness was almost defiant. But Victoria didn't want explanations. With a flick of her manicured hand, she summoned a waiter to take the tray from Camilla's clutch and thrust a crystal platter into her hands instead. "The kitchen is overwhelmed. You'll be more useful there. Follow me." Laughter rippled faintly from a corner of the room, uneasy, guilty. Someone cleared his throat and looked away. The orchestra played on, the violins drowning the injustice in beauty, as if the music itself were complicit. Camilla lowered her gaze only for a heartbeat, her lashes hiding the faint smile tugging at her lips. Her husband's words returned to her like an echo. People reveal themselves when they think no one important is watching. Victoria led her through a side door, past tables laden with caviar and foie gras, into the narrow hallway that pulsed with the hum of unseen labor. The air grew warmer, heavier, filled with the clang of dishes and the hiss of steaming pots. Here, the gowns and diamonds disappeared. Here the workers moved with silent efficiency, heads bowed, hands steady. The kitchen swallowed Camilla whole. Maria, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and damp curls escaping her bun, glanced at her with pity as she dried a glass. "Don't worry," she whispered in Spanish, her voice carrying the weight of years. "They treat us all like this. We're invisible to them." Camilla nodded once, her eyes glinting with something Maria couldn't quite place. Strength, maybe, or a secret. Behind her, Victoria's laughter carried faintly back into the ballroom. "Some people just don't know their place," she announced to a small circle of gala guests, her voice bright with cruelty. "It's our responsibility to remind them." The words drifted through the open door into the kitchen. They settled on Camilla like a spark landing on dry wood, and for the first time that evening, she smiled. Not the smile of a servant resigned to her fate, but of a woman who knew a storm was coming. Because Victoria Hartwell had no idea who she had just humiliated. And when the truth broke through these glittering walls, it wouldn't be the music or the laughter that the guests remembered. It would be the silence, the stunned, shattering silence of power turned upside down in a single night. The kitchen was a world apart from the glittering ballroom. Here the air was thick with steam and the sharp scent of garlic and roasted meats. Pots clanged against burners, knives chopped with quick precision, and voices murmured in languages that didn't belong to the crystal chandeliers above. It was the hidden engine of the night, where sweat replaced jewels and silence replaced applause. Camilla stood near the sink, a crystal platter in her hands, her navy gown already damp at the hem from the water dripping across the tiled floor. Around her, men and women moved like shadows, Latino dishwashers, black waitresses, a few pale-faced sous chefs who kept their eyes down. No one asked questions. No one protested. They all knew their place in this hierarchy of invisibility. Maria, the woman with tired eyes who had spoken earlier, handed her a towel and whispered, "Don't let it get to you. They always find someone to humiliate. Tonight it just happens to be you." Her voice was laced with resignation, not cruelty, resignation forged by 20 years of surviving in the back rooms of New York's elite parties. Camilla accepted the towel with a faint nod. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked quietly, her tone carrying more curiosity than complaint. Maria gave a short laugh, shaking her head. "Too long. Long enough to know that. And women like Victoria Hartwell will never change. They think we're here to serve, not to dream. You'll see. The faster you forget the insult, the easier it is to get through the night." Camilla listened, but her silence didn't carry surrender. There was a weight in her eyes, something Maria couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something deeper, like a storm waiting beyond the horizon. Through the half-open door, faint laughter drifted from the ballroom. Victoria's voice rose above the noise, sharp and triumphant. "Some people just don't understand their place," she said, and her circle of wealthy guests responded with approving chuckles. The words slithered through the air like poison, reaching Camilla's ears with deliberate cruelty. Camilla's hands stilled on the platter she was drying. Her shoulders straightened, her chin lifted slightly, and a smile flickered across her lips, a smile so subtle Maria nearly missed it. It wasn't a smile of defeat. It was the kind of smile a chess master makes before moving a piece that will shift the entire game. Victoria wasn't finished. She swept into the kitchen moments later with two guests at her side, eager to display her power in every corner of the mansion. "You there," she said sharply, gesturing toward Camilla. "You're washing too slowly. People like you should be grateful for any job at all, but it seems you can't even manage this properly." One of the men, Robert Sterling, a real estate mogul with a booming laugh, chuckled cruelly. "Victoria, you're too kind. In my company, someone like that wouldn't make it through the front door." Patricia Westfield, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, sipped from her champagne glass and added, "Exactly. We give too many chances to people who don't deserve them." The words landed heavy in the humid kitchen, and several workers froze, their hands trembling slightly as they continued scrubbing and drying. Maria muttered under her breath, "Don't listen to them. They've been rich too long to remember what it means to be human." But Camilla did not look away. She dried her hands slowly, deliberately, her movements calm in the face of their mockery. Then, lifting her eyes to Victoria, she spoke in a voice so soft it carried a startling power. "Interesting perspective," she said, "especially considering this gala is meant to raise funds for underprivileged children. I imagine they'd be curious to know how the donors truly think about people from humble backgrounds." The room fell silent. Even the clatter of dishes seemed to pause. Victoria blinked, caught off guard, her smile faltering for the first time that night. Robert cleared his throat, his bravado suddenly uncertain. Patricia looked away, suddenly fascinated by the bubbles in her glass. Maria's heart thudded in her chest. She had never seen anyone speak to the powerful like that, not in this house, not in this world. Camilla turned back to the sink, calm and unshaken, her lips curving into a faint smile that only Maria could see. It was a smile of patience, of power kept hidden, of justice waiting to be revealed. Because the truth was this: Camila Williams was no ordinary woman scrubbing dishes in the back of a Manhattan mansion. She carried secrets that could shatter reputations, destroy empires, and rewrite the rules of power in a single night. And the clock was already ticking. The laughter from the ballroom dimmed as the kitchen seemed to shrink around them. Steam curled from the dishwashers, silver trays gleamed under the harsh lights, and the scent of roasted lamb and garlic clung to the air. Yet none of it could disguise the sharp edge of humiliation that Victoria Hartwell had carried into the room. Robert Sterling leaned casually against the counter, his expensive cufflinks catching the light as he tilted his head toward Camilla. "You know what kind of people these are," he said, lowering his voice as though sharing a secret with the kitchen staff, though loud enough for every ear to catch. "Always trying to get ahead with shortcuts, probably came here hoping to meet some rich man to take care of her. Isn't that right?" Victoria smirked, clearly emboldened by his words, as if anyone in this room would waste a second glance. Patricia Westfield set her champagne glass down with a delicate clink. Her eyes swept over Camilla like she was inspecting merchandise. "Look at those hands," she said coldly. "I bet they've never held anything more valuable than a plastic plate." The insult struck the room like a slap. One of the young busboys lowered his gaze, his knuckles whitening as he polished a fork. Maria froze mid-motion, her towel pressed to a wine glass. The humiliation was so open, so deliberate, that even those accustomed to invisibility felt its sting. Camilla's fingers stilled against the damp towel in her hand. For the first time, she turned fully toward them. Her expression was calm, but her eyes carried an intensity that unsettled the trio. Her lips parted, and her voice, measured, deliberate, cut through the kitchen noise with the quiet force of a blade. "Interesting," she said softly, "that you would ridicule someone while attending a gala to help children from poor families. I imagine those children would be fascinated to learn how little dignity you think their lives deserve." The room went silent. Even the dishwasher's hum seemed to fade. Victoria blinked, clearly thrown off balance, but Robert forced a laugh to fill the void. "Well, that's completely different." "Is it?" Camilla asked, tilting her head slightly. Her tone was almost gentle, but the weight of it made Robert's laughter falter. "Because to me, it sounds exactly the same mentality. You call it charity when it's distant, when it makes you look good on stage. But the moment someone you think belongs to that world dares to stand beside you, you call it intrusion, you call it ambition, you call it a threat." Patricia's glass trembled faintly in her hand. She tried to set it down quietly, but the soft clink betrayed her nerves. Victoria stepped forward, trying to regain control. "You're being very bold for someone in your position." Camilla let the towel drop onto the counter, her movements calm, deliberate. She looked directly at Victoria, her gaze steady as a storm about to break. "My position?" she echoed. "And what position would that be exactly?" Victoria opened her mouth, but no words came. The sentence she had been about to say, The word she had been about to use suddenly felt dangerous, too sharp even for her. "I'm what?" Camilla pressed, her tone soft, almost inviting, but her eyes carried power, and every worker in the kitchen felt it. Maria's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen someone dismantle Victoria's arrogance with so few words. Robert shifted uncomfortably. Patricia looked away, unable to meet Camilla's gaze. For the first time, the trio of elites seemed small, their cruelty exposed under the bright kitchen lights. Camilla's calm smile returned, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I wonder," she continued, "if the donors in that ballroom would be as generous if they knew how their hosts speak about the very people they claim to help." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Victoria's jaw tightened, her composure cracking at the edges. She tried again, her voice lower now, less certain. "You're washing dishes in this kitchen. That should tell you something about hierarchies." Camilla's brow lifted slightly, her tone edged with quiet irony. "Hierarchies?" She let the word linger, tasting it like it was something sour. "And yet, I wonder if you know who truly owns this mansion." The color drained slightly from Victoria's face. She forced a laugh, but it rang hollow. "Obviously, it belongs to the Blackstones, a traditional family. They always lend the space for our galas." Camilla said nothing. She simply folded the towel neatly and placed it beside the sink, her eyes steady on Victoria's. Her calmness was more unnerving than any outburst could have been. Maria felt a chill sweep through her as she realized. This woman was not afraid. She was waiting, watching, and something told her that when the waiting ended, the entire room would never be the same. Because Camila Williams wasn't simply a guest or a server or a humiliated woman with a dish towel in her hands. She was something else entirely, something that the glittering elite had not yet begun to imagine. And before the night was over, they would regret every word they had spoken. The kitchen felt tighter now, as if the walls themselves leaned in to witness what was unfolding. Steam clung to the ceiling, the scent of garlic and wine heavy in the air, but no one was focused on the food anymore. Every worker had slowed, their hands still busy with plates and glasses, but their ears tuned only to the exchange between Camilla and the elite trio. Something unspoken was shifting in the room, and everyone could feel it. Camilla set down the silver platter she'd been drying with deliberate care, her movements unhurried, controlled. Her gown shimmered faintly under the harsh fluorescent lights, a stark contrast to the apron tied around her waist. It was a costume forced upon her, and she was ready to shed it. Victoria Hartwell, realizing she had lost the upper hand, tried to force her tone into something commanding. "You should remember your place," she said sharply. "You're standing in a kitchen. That alone tells you the hierarchy here." But Camilla only tilted her head, her expression calm, her voice low. "Hierarchies are fragile things. They can crumble with a single truth revealed at the right time." Her words hung in the air like smoke, and a ripple went through the room. The young busboy stopped stacking plates. Maria's hand froze halfway through drying a glass. Even Robert and Patricia exchanged uneasy glances, though neither dared to admit the small tremor of doubt that had crept into their bones. Victoria forced a laugh, brittle and hollow. "You talk like someone who believes she has power here, but look around you. This is your place tonight, washing dishes." Camilla's lips curved into the faintest smile, one that unsettled Victoria more than defiance ever could. She did not answer directly, but the silence she left behind spoke louder than words. It was the silence of someone waiting for the right moment, the silence of someone holding cards that no one else could see. From the ballroom, faint music floated in, the violins swelling, the laughter spilling through the half-open door. Guests clinked glasses and whispered about Victoria's earlier display, convinced the matter was settled. They had no idea the real performance had only just begun. Camilla glanced at the clock on the far wall, her eyes narrowing slightly. She knew the time. She knew how long the meeting her husband had attended would last. She knew that with each passing minute, the man who truly owned these walls was drawing closer. Maria caught the glance and whispered softly, "You're not afraid." It wasn't a question, but an observation born of awe. Camilla turned to her, her eyes warm for the first time that night. Fear only gives them more power. Sometimes silence is louder than shouting. Sometimes patience is the sharpest weapon of all. Victoria, sensing her authority slipping even in this hidden corner of the mansion, snapped her fingers at a nearby waiter. "Bring me another glass. And you." She pointed at Camilla, her voice tight with irritation. "Try not to look so pleased with yourself. You're only here because I allow it." But even as she spoke, the sharp rhythm of footsteps echoed faintly from the corridor beyond the kitchen. Slow, deliberate, unhurried, but carrying a weight that drew every pair of eyes toward the door. Maria's breath caught. She had worked in this mansion for 20 years, and she would have recognized that stride anywhere. Her lips parted in a whisper, low but urgent. "Mr. Blackstone is coming." The air shifted. Robert straightened, his arrogance faltering. Patricia's fingers tightened around her champagne glass. Victoria's smile faltered as something cold traced down her spine. Camila, meanwhile, smoothed the apron over her gown, her expression unreadable. Then, with a calmness that sent a chill through the room, she untied the knot and let the apron fall onto the counter. "My job here," she murmured, her voice steady, "is just beginning." The footsteps grew louder, closer, reverberating against the tiled floor like the beat of a drum before battle. Every worker stood frozen, every guest in the kitchen stiff with unease, as if they all sensed what was about to walk through that door. And Camila, for the first time that night, allowed herself to truly smile. Because the storm she had been waiting for was finally at the door. The footsteps drew closer, each one echoing with a weight that silenced even the hiss of steam from the stovetops. The kitchen, moments before filled with the clatter of dishes and muttered voices, now felt suspended in time. Every pair of eyes turned toward the hallway, even Victoria's, though she tried to mask her sudden unease with a forced smile. Camila stood perfectly still, her navy gown catching the dull light of the overhead lamps. The apron she had untied lay folded neatly on the counter, a silent rejection of the role she had been forced into. Her hands rested calmly at her sides, but her posture carried a quiet authority that made her look less like a servant and more like someone waiting for her rightful place to be acknowledged. Victoria's voice cracked the silence, brittle with false confidence. "Don't get any ideas. Whoever is coming doesn't concern you. Stay where you are." But Camila didn't move. She didn't need to. The door swung open, and Alexander Blackstone filled the threshold. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his tailored suit cut sharp against the stark light of the kitchen. His eyes, dark, commanding, swept the room in an instant, and the entire atmosphere shifted. For the staff, it was recognition. For the elites standing beside Camila, it was dread. "Where is my wife?" His voice was deep, steady, but threaded with an anger so tightly controlled it sent a shiver through everyone who heard it. The question hit like thunder. Maria's breath caught. The young busboy dropped a spoon into the sink with a loud clatter. Robert Sterling's face went pale, and Patricia Westfield looked as though her glass might shatter in her trembling hand. Victoria blinked, confusion flashing across her face. "Your wife?" she stammered, her perfect composure crumbling. "But you never bring—" And then she stopped. Slowly her eyes turned toward Camila. Camila St. ebbed forward, the faintest smile curving her lips as she slipped her hand from her clutch. The diamond ring, hidden all evening beneath the leather and metal clasp, now caught the light like a shard of lightning. "Actually," Camila said softly, her voice carrying to every corner of the kitchen, "he did bring one." The silence that followed was crushing. No violin from the ballroom could soften it, no laughter could disguise it. The truth stood tall and undeniable between them. Alexander's eyes locked onto Camila, his entire expression transforming. The harshness that had iced his tone melted away as he crossed the room in swift, purposeful strides. "Camila," he breathed, and there was nothing cold about his voice now. "My love, are you all right?" He reached for her hands, ignoring the damp towel and faint traces of dishwater that clung to her skin. His thumb brushed gently against hers, his eyes searching her face as if to reassure himself she was truly unharmed. The elites at the counter were frozen. Robert swallowed hard, his arrogance dissolving. Patricia pressed her lips together as though trying to disappear into the shadows. Victoria's face drained of color, her hands trembling against the silver counter as the weight of her mistake bore down on her. Camila held her husband's gaze, calm and steady. "I'm fine," she said. "It's been educational." Alexander's jaw tightened as his head turned toward Victoria, Robert, and Patricia. His voice, when it came, was no longer warm but sharp as a blade. "Educational? I'd like to hear what exactly they tried to teach you." No one spoke. No one dared. The air was thick with unspoken terror, the hierarchy of the night shifting before their eyes. The woman they had mocked, humiliated, and forced into the kitchen was not only their equal, she was the very woman who owned the home they stood in. And Alexander Blackstone. One had just arrived to make sure every single one of them understood exactly what that meant. Alexander's presence filled the kitchen like a storm cloud rolling across the horizon, calm on the surface, but heavy with the promise of thunder. His grip on Camila's hand was firm, steady, protective, as if the simple act of holding her grounded him in the face of what he had just discovered. His eyes, though softened when they looked at her, turned back toward the others with a chill that froze the air. Victoria Hartwell tried to recover first, her lips parted, her voice trembling as she stammered, "Mr. Blackstone, there's been a misunderstanding. If I had known—" Alexander cut her off with a single glance. His eyes burned like ice, and Victoria's words crumbled in her throat. "A misunderstanding?" he said, his voice low but carrying the weight of judgment. "You forced my wife into a kitchen. You humiliated her in front of your guests. You degraded her while parading yourself as the hostess of a charity gala. Tell me, Victoria, what part of that is a misunderstanding?" The silence was suffocating. The staff, who had lived their lives invisible, now stood rooted in place, their eyes wide as they watched power shift before their very eyes. Maria pressed her hand against her chest, her heart pounding, unable to believe what she was witnessing. Robert Sterling cleared his throat, trying to salvage some dignity. "Mr. Blackstone, if we had known she was your wife, of course we would have—" Alexander's gaze snapped to him, sharp enough to slice through every word. "If you had known." His voice rose slightly, hard and unyielding. "So you admit that your cruelty is selective, that you only grant respect when someone carries a title or a fortune to shield them. Tell me, Robert, how many others have you spoken to this way when you thought no one important was listening?" Robert's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing like a man drowning in his own excuses. Patricia Westfield tried next, her voice delicate, pleading. "Mr. Blackstone, please, it was never meant to—" "Never meant to what?" Alexander snapped. "Never meant to be exposed? Never meant for the world to hear the poison that drips so easily from your lips?" Camila stood quietly at his side, her expression calm, her hands folded over her clutch once more, but inside her heart thrummed with the steady beat of vindication. She had recorded every word, every insult, every cruel laugh. She had been patient. And now the truth was standing in the middle of the kitchen, ready to break the night wide open. Alexander turned back to Victoria, his eyes narrowing. "This is my home, my family's name on these walls, and tonight you treated the woman who belongs here more than anyone else as though she were nothing. Do you know what that makes you, Victoria? It makes you a fraud, a hypocrite, and worse, a coward who hides her prejudice behind chandeliers and string quartets." Victoria's knees wavered. She reached for the counter to steady herself, her silver gown shimmering under the harsh lights like armor that suddenly felt thin, useless. Camila finally spoke, her voice soft but piercing. "You told me earlier that people like me never get very far. Perhaps tonight you'll learn what people like me are truly capable of." Her words carried through the room like a bell. The staff exchanged looks of awe. For the first time in their lives, they weren't witnessing silence and submission. They were witnessing defiance cloaked in dignity, power delivered not through rage, but through calm precision. Alexander's arm slipped protectively around his wife's shoulders as he turned once more to the trembling trio. His tone shifted, quieter now, but every syllable was sharpened with finality. "You tried to teach my wife her place. Tonight, I will teach you yours." The sound of his assistant David's footsteps echoed from the doorway, a tablet in his hands and his eyes wide as he took in the scene. Alexander extended a hand toward him without looking away from the elites. "David, we're going to make some calls, right here, right now." And in that instant, the kitchen, once filled with steam and sweat and silence, became the stage for the downfall of Manhattan's most untouchable names. The reckoning had begun. The air in the kitchen had become electric, thick with dread for some, charged with vindication for others. Every worker had gone still, their hands frozen over half-dried plates and dripping glasses. The only sound now was the steady hum of the dishwasher, a mechanical heartbeat echoing through the room as Alexander Blackstone turned to his assistant. "David," he said, his voice low but unshakable, "open my contacts." David's hands trembled slightly as he unlocked the tablet. Even he, who had followed Alexander for years through boardrooms and billion-dollar negotiations, had never seen this particular fire in his employer's eyes. Alexander turned back to the three elites who had mocked his wife only minutes before. "Victoria Hartwell, Robert Sterling, Patricia Westfield," he said, his tone cold and deliberate, as though etching their names into stone. "You've spent the evening teaching cruelty as though it were tradition. Tonight, you will learn what it means to be powerless." Victoria tried to compose herself, her smile cracking at the edges. "Alexander, please, I've known your family for years. We've worked together. Surely we can resolve this with civility." "Civility?" Alexander's voice cut like a blade. "You forced my wife to wash dishes in her own home. You called her people like that, and now you ask for civility? He took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. Civility ended the moment you stripped her dignity. For the amusement of your guests. Camila's hand slipped into her clutch. With calm precision, she pulled out her phone and set it on the counter. A faint red light blinked on the screen. "Every word," she said softly. "Every insult, every laugh, it's all here." Robert's face went white. Patricia's fingers tightened on her glass so hard the stem threatened to snap. Alexander's eyes narrowed with grim satisfaction. "Play it," he commanded. Camila tapped the screen, and the kitchen filled with echoes of their cruelty. Victoria's voice, mocking and sharp. "Some people just don't know their place." Robert's booming chuckle. "Probably came here to find some rich man." Patricia's icy disdain. "Look at those hands, I bet they've never held anything valuable." The words hung in the air like poison made audible. The staff, who had heard them whispered all their lives, now heard them exposed, undeniable, recorded forever. Some of them lowered their eyes, not from shame but from the sheer weight of what it meant. Others stared openly, their faces alight with a cautious hope that justice might finally belong to them too. Victoria swayed where she stood, her breath shallow. "You can't release that," she whispered, her mask of confidence shattering. "It would ruin me." Alexander's lips curved into a cold smile. "Exactly." He took the tablet from David and made the first call, his voice steady and cutting. "Good evening, Janet. Yes, this is Alexander Blackstone. Cancel all Blackstone Foundation contracts with Hartwell Events, effective immediately. No, not temporary, permanent." He ended the call without waiting for protest. Victoria gasped softly, her world collapsing in real time. The second call rang out, Robert Sterling's name heavy in the silence. "Yes, this is Alexander Blackstone. Terminate all agreements with Sterling developers. I don't care about penalties or clauses. Find the exits. Make it clean." He ended that call too, his tone colder than ice. Robert stumbled back against the counter, his arrogance draining from him like color from his cheeks. And then came Patricia. Alexander dialed with surgical precision. "Westfield Pharmaceuticals, this is Blackstone, effective immediately. End the supply contracts to all my clinics and subsidiaries. We'll take our business elsewhere." Patricia's face collapsed into horror. "You can't," she began, but Alexander silenced her with a glare that made the words die in her throat. Around them, the staff exchanged stunned glances. For years they had lived in the shadows of the powerful, silently enduring their contempt. And here, before their very eyes, those same powerful people were unraveling, contract by contract, call by call. Alexander placed the tablet down, his jaw clenched, his voice low. "You thought humiliation was your sport. Tonight, it became your undoing." Camila lifted the phone once more, her finger hovering over the screen. "This recording," she said, "isn't just proof. It's a mirror. And when the world sees it, they won't just see your faces. They'll see the ugliness you've built your power on." Victoria shook her head violently, tears springing to her eyes. "Please, don't release it. We can fix this. We can make it right." But Camila's gaze was steady, her voice calm. "The time to make it right was before you thought I was invisible." The sound of the recording still lingered in the air, as if the walls themselves were holding the words hostage. Every servant in the kitchen stood straighter, their eyes lifted, their silence no longer born of fear, but of reverence. And as the trio of elites realized the depth of their ruin, Camila and Alexander stood together, united, unshaken, and ready to make the truth echo beyond the glittering walls of that Mauchar. Sion. The reckoning had begun, and it would not end here. By dawn, Manhattan was already humming with scandal. Headlines blazed across phone screens before the city's first coffee shops even opened. The silent revenge, how New York's elite was unmasked in a single night. The recording, Camila's calm, steady voice framed against the venom of Victoria, Robert, and Patricia, had gone viral. Within hours, it had been played on morning news programs, dissected on talk shows, and shared millions of times across social media. Clips of the humiliation were everywhere. Victoria's voice sneering, "Some people just don't know their place." Robert's booming laugh, "Probably came here to meet some rich man." Patricia's disdainful tone, "Look at those hands. I bet they've never held anything valuable." Each sentence was replayed, rewound, and broadcast to an audience that stretched far beyond the glittering ballroom walls. For the first time in decades, the powerful trio's words were not whispered behind closed doors. They were on every television, every phone, every timeline. The public outrage was instant, fierce, and relentless. At Hartwell Events, phones rang without pause. Clients who had once begged for a spot on Victoria's calendar now demanded refunds and cancellations. By noon, 3 major contracts had been terminated. By evening, her inbox was a graveyard of withdrawal notices. The empire she had built over 20 years was collapsing in less than 20 hours. Robert Sterling's fall was no gentler. Investors pulled out. Partners in London and Dubai froze accounts. A press release from Sterling developers insisting the comments were taken out of context only fanned the flames of public fury. Stock prices plummeted, and for the first time in his life, Robert sat in his corner office staring not at opportunity, but ruin. Patricia Westfield fared no better. Her company's board, already wary of whispers about her conduct, convened an emergency session. By midnight, she had been stripped of her seat. Employees who had once cowered under her icy authority now came forward with stories of prejudice, bias, and disdain, emboldened by Camila's example. What had been hidden for years erupted into daylight. Meanwhile, in kitchens and break rooms across the city, workers huddled over phones, watching Camila's calm defiance replayed again and again. "Did you hear the way she said it?" Maria whispered to a fellow dishwasher as they replayed the clip for the 10th time. "The time to make it right was before you thought I was invisible." Her words resonated like a hymn. They were quoted on protest signs, tweeted with the hashtag Camila Challenge, and painted onto cardboard held up in front of luxury buildings. People across the country began sharing their own stories. Waitresses, janitors, doormen, all revealing the indignities they'd endured in silence. For the first time, their voices felt amplified. In a quiet cafe downtown, Camila sat with Alexander, watching the ripple spread. She sipped her coffee slowly, her diamond ring glinting faintly in the morning light. "I expected exposure," she murmured, her voice calm, "but not this, not a movement." Alexander watched her with something between pride and awe. "You gave them something they've been waiting for, a voice they could believe in." Outside, cameras flashed. Reporters called her name, but Camila didn't rush to the microphones. She wasn't interested in spectacle. Her power was quieter, more deliberate. Every interview she gave was measured, her words chosen not for revenge but for change. "The point isn't that I was humiliated," she told one journalist. "The point is that countless others face the same indignity every day, without the platform to fight back. If my voice can expose that, then this wasn't just my moment, it's everyone's." And so the scandal ceased to be only about Victoria Hartwell, Robert Sterling, or Patricia Westfield. It became about the system that had allowed them to flourish unchecked. It became about the unspoken rules of power and prejudice in glittering halls. By nightfall, the ballroom where it all began stood empty. The chandeliers still glittered, the marble still gleamed, but the grandeur felt hollow. The name Hartwell no longer carried weight, it carried shame. And somewhere in the city, Victoria stared at her phone, scrolling through news headlines, her hands shaking. For the first time, she realized the truth Camila had embodied with such terrifying grace. Real power was not measured by who you could humiliate. Real power was measured by who you could lift up. The world had shifted overnight, and it wasn't finished yet. A year later, the memory of that night in the mansion still echoed across Manhattan, not as gossip, but as legend. The gala had been meant to dazzle, to raise money, to reinforce the hierarchy of glitter and privilege. Instead, it had shattered illusions, toppled empires, and given rise to a voice the world hadn't realized it was waiting for. Camila Williams stood at the podium of Harvard Business School, facing an auditorium filled with hundreds of graduates in black robes and tasseled caps. Cameras lined the aisles, recording every moment. This was no ordinary commencement speech. It was the moment a woman once dismissed as invisible would speak to the next generation of leaders about what true power meant. She took a breath, letting the silence settle before she began. Her navy dress was simple, her presence commanding. When she spoke, her voice carried not just across the room but into the hearts of everyone listening. "Last year," she said, her eyes scanning the crowd, "I was forced into a kitchen, told I had no place among the elite. They believed I was invisible, insignificant, powerless. But here's the truth. Dignity does not come from chandeliers or titles. It is not granted by the wealthy. It cannot be stripped away by humiliation. Dignity is an inalienable right, and true power lies in how we choose to honor it in others." The room was so silent that even the clicking of a pen sounded loud. A few students leaned forward, their eyes shining. Professors shifted in their seats, nodding slowly. Camila's voice softened, but the weight of it grew. "Revenge was never my goal. Exposure was never the point. The downfall of 3 powerful names made headlines, yes, but the real victory was in the thousands of workers who stood a little taller the next day. The waitresses who said no to being disrespected. The janitors who demanded fair treatment. The countless men and women who finally saw that silence is not the same as weakness. Her words rippled through the hall like waves breaking against stone. In the front row, Alexander watched her with pride, his hand folded neatly in his lap. He had seen her at her most vulnerable, apron tied over her gown, dishwater staining her hands. And now, here she was, standing at the pinnacle of respect, not because of his name, but because of her own unshakable dignity. Camila's eyes glimmered as she looked out over the sea of graduates. True power, she said, her voice firm, is not humiliating those you believe are beneath you. True power is elevating those the world tries to diminish. If you carry anything from my words today, let it be this. The best revenge is not to destroy your enemies. It is to build a world where their cruelty cannot survive. The auditorium erupted into applause, not polite or restrained, but thunderous, students rising. To their feet, professors clapping until their palms reddened, tears glistening in the eyes of some who had spent their lives teaching about leadership but had rarely seen it embodied so purely. Maria, the veteran kitchen worker who had once whispered comfort to Camila over damp glasses, sat quietly in the back row. Camila had insisted she be invited. Maria's hands shook as she clapped, pride swelling in her chest. She wasn't invisible anymore either. Outside the auditorium, news outlets were already crafting their headlines. From kitchen to keynote, the woman who redefined power. Clips of Camila's speech would spread across the internet before the day was over, igniting conversations in classrooms, boardrooms, and dinner tables across the country. And somewhere in a modest apartment in Queens, Victoria Hartwell sat alone, watching the speech on a flickering television. Her eyes brimmed with tears as she finally understood. She had not just lost contracts or prestige that night. She had lost the chance to be part of something greater than herself. Camila's words lingered in the air, destined to outlive the scandal, to become a manifesto for those who had been silenced for too long. And when the applause finally subsided, she stepped down from the podium, her smile calm, her presence radiant, her legacy sealed. Because the woman once pushed into a kitchen now stood at the forefront of change, and she carried with her the truth that no one, not even the elite of Manhattan, could ever erase again. The night of the gala had become a scar on New York's high society, a wound that refused to close. A year after Camila's Harvard speech, her story had not faded. It had deepened, spreading into corners of the world that Victoria Hartwell, Robert Sterling, and Patricia Westfield once believed untouchable. Camila and Alexander sat together in their Manhattan penthouse, the city lights glittering through floor-to-ceiling windows. Papers lay scattered across the table, proposals, partnerships, invitations. Camila had become more than the woman at the center of a scandal. She was now a force reshaping how corporations, governments, and institutions thought about dignity and power. But tonight was different. Tonight was not about speeches or contracts. It was about a call that had come only hours earlier, one that stirred both memory and unease. Victoria Hartwell had asked to meet. Alexander was skeptical. She ruined herself, he said, his voice low, his hand tracing the rim of his glass. Why give her the dignity of your time? Camila's gaze softened, her eyes thoughtful. Because redemption isn't about her dignity. It's about whether she's ready to face the truth. If she's sincere, perhaps she can help rebuild what she once destroyed. The next evening, they met at a quiet cafe far from the glittering towers of Manhattan. Victoria arrived first, wearing none of her old glamour. Her silver gowns were gone, replaced by a plain black coat. Her hair, once meticulously styled, fell loose around her tired face. She looked smaller, humbled. When she saw Camila, she rose immediately. "Thank you for coming," she whispered, her voice trembling. Camila nodded but did not sit right away. She studied Victoria carefully, searching for the familiar arrogance that had once filled every room she entered. It wasn't there. Instead, there was something else, raw, unguarded, broken. Victoria's eyes filled with tears as she clasped her hands together. "I destroyed everything. My company, my reputation, my family name, and I did it with my own words. You gave me a chance that night to see myself, and I refused. Now, I can't escape the reflection." Camila slid into the seat across from his. Her movements calm, her presence steady. "Reflection is a beginning," she said softly, "but it isn't redemption." Victoria's voice cracked. "I don't know how to make it right. Letters, apologies, none of it seems enough." "Because words aren't enough," Camila said, her tone measured but not unkind. "Reparation isn't written in ink. It's lived. It's in the actions that lift others up instead of tearing them down." Victoria lowered her eyes, shame washing over her. "Tell me what to do." Camila leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "You built your empire on exclusion, on the belief that dignity belonged only to a few. If you want redemption, build something that proves the opposite. Fund scholarships for the workers you ignored. Create opportunities for those you once made invisible. And don't do it for your name, do it quietly, consistently, with no expectation of applause." For a long moment, Victoria sat in silence, her shoulders shaking. Finally, she nodded. "I will." When Camila rose to leave, Victoria reached out hesitantly. "Do you forgive me?" Camila paused, her expression unreadable. Then she said gently, "Forgiveness is not mine to give. It belongs to every person you ever treated as invisible. What I can give you is a path. What you do with it is your choice." She left Victoria there, seated in the quiet cafe, staring down at her trembling hands. Outside, the city roared on. Horns, lights, laughter. Camila stepped into the night air, Alexander waiting for her at the car. He studied her face. Did she mean it? Camilla's eyes lingered on the glowing skyline. "Time will tell," she murmured. "But even if she fails, what matters is this. Her downfall made room for a movement larger than either of us, and nothing she does or doesn't do can stop it now." Alexander slipped his arm around her, pulling her close as the car door opened. The world had changed because of her silence in a kitchen. Now it was changing again because of her voice in the world. And though enemies had fallen and reputations had crumbled, Camila knew the real story wasn't about revenge. It was about the legacy she was building. One action, one truth, one voice at a time. Her story wasn't ending. It was only beginning. The storm that began in a Manhattan kitchen had grown far beyond anything Camila could have imagined. What started as a scandal had become a movement, one with roots spreading into boardrooms, classrooms, and government halls. Her words, once whispered in humiliation, were now quoted in policy documents, business seminars, and graduation speeches across the country. 6 months after her meeting with Victoria, Camila stood before a sea of faces in Washington, D.C. The National Summit on Equity had invited her as keynote speaker, not as a guest, but as a leader shaping the future. Behind her, banners read, "Dignity is power." It was no longer just her mantra, it was a rallying cry for thousands. As she approached the podium, she saw not gowns and tuxedos, but teachers, nurses, janitors, CEOs, and senators sitting side by side. The audience wasn't divided by wealth or status, it was unified by something deeper. She spoke without notes, her voice steady, her presence magnetic. True change doesn't come from speeches or scandals. It comes from what you do when no one is watching. It comes from how you treat the person serving your coffee, the janitor sweeping your hall, the worker scrubbing dishes you'll never touch. If you cannot honor their dignity, then your wealth, your titles, your influence mean nothing. Applause erupted, loud and unrestrained, but Camila lifted her hand gently. "Do not applaud me. Applaud yourselves for daring to imagine a world where every person matters. Applaud the courage of those who once stayed silent, but are silent no longer." Her words struck deep. Some in the audience wept openly. Others nodded fierce, as though she had given them permission to claim the dignity they'd been denied for years. Beyond the summit, ripples turned into waves. Corporations launched equity programs inspired by her consulting firm. Universities began including her speech and leadership curricula. Nonprofits reached out, wanting to partner, to learn, to carry her message farther. And in a small classroom in the Bronx, Maria, once a tired dishwasher resigned to invisibility, stood in front of a group of women half her age, teaching them administrative skills. Camila had given her the tools, but Maria had taken the leap. "I spent 20 years drying glasses for the rich," she told her students, her voice strong. "Now I'm here to tell you that you don't have to stay where they put you. You are worth more than they ever told you." The ripple was becoming a tide. Not everyone welcomed it. Old money circles whispered Camila's name with resentment. Magazines once eager to photograph her at galas now accused her of dismantling tradition. Politicians debated whether her influence was too radical. But the louder the pushback, the stronger the movement grew. Because people recognized truth when they heard it, and truth has a way of outlasting every lie. One evening, Alexander found her sitting by the window of their penthouse, looking out over the city she had once walked through unseen. Her phone buzzed endlessly with requests, invitations, opportunities. But she was quiet, reflective. "Do you ever feel the weight of it?" he asked, sliding into the seat beside her. Camila smiled faintly, her hand brushing against his. every day. But I also feel the joy of it, because it's not about me anymore. It never really was. It's about the people who watched that night and realized they weren't alone. Alexander pressed a kiss to her temple. You turned humiliation into a revolution. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her eyes glinting with quiet fire. No, she whispered, we turned truth into a legacy, and it's only just beginning. The city lights burned against the night sky, alive and restless. Somewhere in another kitchen, another woman lifted her head a little higher, her silence replaced with courage. Somewhere else, a man who once mocked another's place now questioned his own. And as the movement spread across borders and oceans, one truth remained unshakable. Dignity was not charity, it was power. And Camila Williams, the woman once told she didn't belong, had made sure the world would never forget it again.